Hey, welcome back for another episode with JB, where we talk all things building businesses, exits, and all of that impacts on the founder itself. I'm so excited today to have my guest, Vinnie Fisher. Vinnie is a guy who's had an enormous wealth of experience starting, running, scaling, and even exiting multiple businesses. And what's interesting about Vinnie is that he started his career as an M&A attorney. And now Vinnie is spending his time really pouring into entrepreneurs and leaders so that they can understand what their legacy is going to be, and just really has a heart to help people along their journey. So mostly he does that with Beyond Your Shadow, which, Vinnie, if I'm correct, is also the title of your fourth and upcoming book, right?
That's correct. First off, JB, thanks for having me, man.
Thank
what
you
a
for
great
coming,
introduction. And a friend of ours, Tony, got us introduced. And so I'm super excited to be here today. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I think maybe to start from not the beginning, but the beginning of, from a career perspective, back in, I believe it was 2007 that I saw, you're a practicing M&A attorney, probably touching some, tax and finance as well. And what made you decide to go from practicing attorney and just jump with both feet into the world of being an entrepreneur yourself?
So, in fairness, I already had a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit to me. We're in the process of, at this moment, failing on a pretty large, significant nursing home acquisition that I led the charge on. So dumped a few bucks of the Fisher Empire into that. We had just successfully launched a business that I actually even brag about on my exits, a creative learning workshop. And it was really around mental retardation. So I've always kind of been the business guy. I was a main partner in the firm that I was at before I wound it down. And one morning, my accountant referred this young kid over, and I'm like, all right, fine, I'll meet with him. He needs some help on his business. And it was this internet whiz bang kid who came in with his big fancy Hummer and all his frosty hair tips. I'm teasing him because I can now, and still great friends today. And he starts describing me his internet business, and I'm like, does this thing really work? I don't even he's using fancy terms like
even
URL.
real. Yeah.
I have no idea what any of these things mean. And then he slides over his bank statements. And I'm like, wait a minute. That's worthy of another conversation or two. So fast forward a year and change later, we're business partners.
Wow. And it went well enough. Now, did you sort of ease your way into the water, or did you just say, nope, this is what I'm going to do, I'm no longer going to practice law, or were you doing both for a while?
Yeah. So I really enjoyed my law firm. I had a ton of deal flow. I touched a lot of big work, and we just had a breakdown in the firm. I would have honestly loved to have kept that. The deal flow, if anyone is a deal flow junkie, whether you're in, exiting and you're looking for other stuff, or whether or not you've opened up your own family office, honestly, having a professional firm is a wonderful piece to getting deal flow. So I wanted to keep it. It was just a breakdown in the partnership at that, but I had broken kind of a way, so to speak, to go grow our business enterprise, and was sharing it with the partnership at the firm. And then the firm is what imploded. And so I probably wanted both, and quickly realized that my journey wasn't to keep both.
Yeah. So I'm doing reverse math here based upon, Vinnie has a lovely wife of 29 years and 4 kids. And I'm doing reverse math based upon how old you told me your kids are now. And I'm thinking you at this time have 3 or 4 kids. And was there any apprehension of gosh, I've got this family to support. This is a pretty significant departure and change. How did that play into the family dynamic? And what did your wife think?
She already knew she married a large risk taker. So it's weird when a lawyer talks like this, but I promise you, even though your listening audience, at least at that stage of my life, I probably ranked up at near the highest, if not still the highest risk taker that I had known. And I'm always an all chips in kind of guy. And so it didn't occur to me that I don't believe in things like plan Bs and all those kind of stuff. So I was just going for it. I actually had some really good acumen. I knew we were going to be successful, but in all fairness to your answer, I didn't push all the chips, and I kept the firm going while I did it. So I had both.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's really interesting what you said about your wife knew who she married. I think my wife would say the same thing, probably we met in college. And so probably from the same time, I didn't know it at the time. I didn't understand what personality profiling, whether that be DISC or Colby or any of the others. I didn't have any of those tools when I was in college, but looking back, I would have, it's a little different now at 44, but I would have been as high as you can get on the risk taker spectrum. But I viewed risk differently. And I don't know if you can relate to this. Folks who, right now, the vogue thing is a lot of folks are leaving, they're starting search funds or whatever they're doing, and they're wanting to go into acquisition, and they want to go and leave whatever corporate gig they have doing the thing that they're doing, and they want to get into acquiring businesses. And the thing that sometimes stops them or impedes progress is their perception of what risk is. It's like, gosh, this is a really risky thing to leave this corporate gig and to move into something else. And for me, I don't know if this is true for you, Vinny, but I viewed both of the things to be risky. I view working, because I've done both, working a corporate career and trying to ascend that ladder, doing all those things, and then being an entrepreneur and all the things that come with that. To me, they're both risky. They're just different types of risk, and you have to sort of figure out which one of those things better suits your personality.
Yeah, it's funny. My response, and I agree with you on that completely, by the way. My response comes from three things. One, my observations of helping, hundreds of people buy and sell companies. Like, I think I'm above 500 on those in my tenure of that.
Yep.
And honestly, I've never bought something for myself. I've always built it bootstraps up. Yep. And so my observation is this, from all of that experience, is that I look at it like someone might look at their tax return. I always ask somebody, how do you want to treat the tax code? Do you want to file right down the middle on your tax return such that you never get a letter from the IRS? Will the letter from the IRS alone cause you to be stressed out? Or can you handle the letter and your goalpost is actually whether or not you would win a successful complaint or audit with the IRS? I encourage everyone to kind of go through that mental exercise, because most people just don't even want the letter.
Yeah.
And so if you're that kind of person, then I'd say your risk tolerance is probably better served on someone else's team. And if your risk tolerance tends to be one where you can engage that, but ultimately look to prevailing, then maybe you have more tolerance to take a little bit more risk in the checkbook. And I find that most people overcredit themselves with the kind of risk they think they're willing to take.
That's a great analogy. And I'm chuckling a little bit to myself because over the years, I've received a whole bunch of letters from the IRS. And the first time it ever happens, you're like, what is this? And then after you understand what it is in the process, and to your point, you have the ability to say, well, here's the proof that you're asking me for. Here's what we're doing. And it ends up working out fine. You become less concerned about it. But I'd love to dig into, that's a lot of businesses that you've worked either buy side, sell side, or both, and a lot of deals that you've seen, a lot of deals that you've structured. And you have a process that you like to use when you're working with clients that, similar to me, that really guides them along the process of how to make sure that your business actually is exit ready. What are some things that consistently that you run into that folks either don't know or don't realize about that process and what's necessary for it?
That's really good. I think there's a couple of good stats out there. People get crazy about stats. The best thing about a stat is you can make up a stat to support a stat. So,
50% of the time, it works all the time.
If you're a student of like industries, there are certain things that stand out to me. One of them is the number is 16%, the amount of successful sold companies in America.
Yep.
The number is very small, and people act like this is like this big thing that everybody does. And so, the process that I've observed and seen and watched through all these transactions is a process that most of us do. We find a gap. We're either good at something, we get a little bit of momentum, we grab a couple customers, and we fix it as we go. It's very normal in the enterprise of business. What I noticed along the way is that most people never paid attention after they got a first customer base to what really makes for a growing and stable company. And so along the way, I did it for myself first, to be honest with you. I learned all these things and started coming up with like a framework of what would make my companies sale ready, even if I don't want to sell it. Because I usually would go into it not wanting to sell it. And then somewhere about, let's say 10, 12 years ago, I kind of changed my thinking on this. My attitude now is if I wouldn't want to buy my business from myself in 5 years, why would anyone else? And so I started actually thinking in a framework of, is my business sale ready? And so here's my anecdotal advice. You can go on the Google right now, our friends at AI, anywhere you want, and ask for the top 10 things that value a company.
Yeah.
And you're going to get that top 10 list. If you want your own sale ready matrix, just go get the top 10 things valuators use to value a business and start letting that be your framework to what's sale ready. Now, we could give away, and by the way, we'll do that at Beyond Your Shadow. We'll create a gift for your users. They can have our sale ready matrix. It's all yours. I'll give you the blueprint. That's not the part of it that's important. And part of it is go do something with it.
Right.
But the first piece of it is what everyone knows. It's kind of like the word of God. There's parts of it, you just don't want to do it. And so it's the financial piece. So I set out to create a company, and I sold it here in August, was to fix the first 3 bullet points on the valuation matrix, which is know your numbers. And I really was not good at knowing my numbers. And there's way difference between building an offer for sale versus building a company for sale. And so those are different mindsets. And so honestly, people are like, what are you really good at? Well, after 4 exits, I'm really good at building a business.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting is that the business that you're talking about, I think, is fully accountable, right?
Yep.
So fully accountable, there's a nuance here that I think is fascinating that Vinnie just said, and I agree with him. This is my experience as well, is that the number one thing that folks struggle with is they don't know their numbers to the detail level that they should. And some of that is intimidation or just not knowing exactly how to set up the right dashboard. Something simple as that. But what's interesting is that Fully Accountable was a financial firm that was geared towards helping folks understand their numbers. And Vinnie said he could have been better at understanding his own numbers. And I'm not saying that to make Vinnie look bad, because I certainly have been guilty of the same darn thing. It's to make the listener, you, feel better that, listen, everybody struggles with these things sometimes. And that
I still struggle with it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I built Fully Accountable because of my blind spots in business. I'm an M&A lawyer, tax certified, and I have this allergic aversion to certain ways, reports, and data. I still fight that every day, even with all of my success. And so, listen, I'm no different than someone who's in a startup mode. I might have a few more bucks in the bank now, and I might have a little bit more at bats, but I haven't solved my numbers issue. I just went out and built a company to shelter me from it and actually help other people in the process.
Absolutely. And there's some real gold in what you were saying a moment ago, which is that the way that we run our business in the day-to-day, sometimes people think of exiting a business like staging a house right before you're about to sell it. And that's a really dangerous approach to it. And the truth is, my first 2 companies that I exited, I did the same thing. Toward the end, I was like, okay, it's time to clean this stuff up off the floor, move some things around, get the finances in order. The reality is, at any given time, if you have a business that's exitable, transferable is the word that I would use. Because I don't care what your valuation is. I don't care what any CPA gives you, anybody else. Those are all theoretical valuations. It has to be transferable. And in order to be transferable, there's some things that you need to do to make sure that you are not too relevant to your business, and that a new person who is not you could come in and look at it and say, oh yeah, we can transition this into what we're doing. We understand how it's run. We understand where the profit lies. We'll do that. The interesting thing is, running a business that is transferable and exitable at any time, guess what that does? It makes a better business, whether you decide to exit or not. And it gives you some quality of life and allows you to be something that's really important to know to you and I, which is, a husband or mother and father, and be able to exist outside of the thing that you're doing. And the other is that systems and processes are, to me, as a high D&I, and I know you're also, if we get into some of these personality profiles,
high as it can be.
High as it can be. Same.
In both my personal and private, and in my business world, that's me. This idea of being compliant, and that's ironic for a lawyer to say that, but you're talking to the wrong guy. Yeah.
And so it's funny anytime I bring a guest on, if they have a LinkedIn profile, I have a tool that I use, and I go on and I click the tool, and the tool tells me kind of where they fall on the Myers-Briggs scale, and also the DISC profile. And Vinnie and I are almost identical, which is unusual. I don't see a whole lot.
I want to find out about this tool. I didn't know.
I'll tell you. And actually, people might find it valuable. It's called Crystal Nose. And
Crystal Nose.
You sign up for it, and then you can add a browser extension to LinkedIn. And what it does is, anytime you pull up a profile, it actually has a little thing. You can click a button, and it's just a credit system. So you have however many credits, and each time you pull one, it takes a credit, and it will tell you how to communicate best with the person that you're having a conversation with.
I love that. Dude, that is such a good hack.
Or prospecting. And what I use it for is just a quick and dirty, like with you, it was really easy because your personality profile is so similar to mine. And it actually will tell you if there's any difference. Like what's interesting is this is an approximation, but one of the things it shows is risk tolerance.
Yeah.
I'm as far to the left today. I'm as far to the left still as you can go, which I would quibble with a little bit. You've actually moved, according to this thing, you've moved a little bit closer to just left to center.
Without a doubt, I will tell you, it's funny. We're 10 years different in age. I'm 54. What you don't know about me is I'm on this today is 11 weeks removed from open heart triple bypass surgery.
Wow.
And emergency. And I, about 2 years ago, really started thinking very differently about my life, my legacy, what's next. Yeah. I started to notice in some of that, thinking a little bit smaller on certain categories. I started noticing counting my chips. I started doing things I have actually never done before. Now, some of that's wisdom, some of that's mortality, some of that's what's next. But I'm not surprised to hear that.
What are some of the things that you found yourself doing that you hadn't done before? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I've always been the hero. I touch things, I do stuff. I'm the one, I believe that I've always been in command and control. Even as I've built out teams, and my business sold flawlessly, 3 of the 4 of them, because I build teams and I don't trap myself into the work. And so I really have an intuition to build a good company, and I don't have customer density problems and all the classic things that you can follow our sale ready matrix and you can see, like, don't do these things. Well, I'm pretty good at those. Yeah. But I started to realize that in my theory of multiplication, I believe in leaders need to build leaders, that there's a generational component to this. And maybe I got 20 or 30 years left in this run. And what am I really doing to deepen it? I can hit you with a question that'll sober you that I never would have asked my 44-year-old self. What's your great grandfather's name?
I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't know mine either. Wow. I had a guy hit me with that. He said, cool. Well, if you're blessed to be known to the 3rd generation, then you're blessed. Wow. He said, now go back and do something about that. And the do something about that first round for me was to be more hero, more command, more control. And it was actually the wrong response. So I started I sold my company. I didn't need to. I sold my company to go all chips on this idea of legacy, multiplication, and mentorship. And so I'm in a phase now where there's this really weird thing happening to me about dying to my hero self while the trophies that I get mostly and really celebrate are the ones without my names on it.
Oh, I love that, Vinnie. I'm smiling a little on the inside because if anyone who's worked with me for any length of time understands that, yeah, we're going to get into a lot of business and tactics, but a lot of what I do is more about the human being. And it's a lot of the things we're talking about. And what I say regularly, because I say it to myself in the mirror all the time, which is, what has to die in me so that I can make the impact and become what I'm meant to become? I say it all the time. And part of that comes from my faith, and there's a direct parallel between my Christian faith and sort of that ethos in general, which is I'm always trying to be less of me and more of him, because it usually works out better. But I think that I would agree with you in my 30s, certainly 20s, 30s, and maybe early 40s. The last 3 years have been very different, but it was very much, I was a problem-solving addict, and I wanted the ball, to mix metaphors and use a sports term. Give me the ball. I'm going to punch it over the goal line. We're going to get it done. And now I can do that when I have to. You never really lose that gear when you need it. But for the most part, is that what I want to teach my children or the entrepreneurs that I'm blessed to work with, that they have to solve every problem versus, no, you have to figure out how to build up other people well and how to lead those people and sort of mentor them. So you talked about legacy, and legacy is something that depending on the age, we have a massive number of folks who are sort of in that baby boomer generation. And when you do a force rank of what the reason is that they're considering an exit, what's interesting about that generation is that most of them, the financial windfall is not at the top of that list. It's different than other generations. What's at the top of that list is legacy and impact and what's going to happen if I sell this business to all of the folks that have been working with me for, in some cases, decades. Yeah. I've seen them have children. Sometimes I know their grandchildren. I want to make sure that all of those people are okay and that the thing that we built hopefully lives on. And so their greatest worry is, who, if anyone, is going to take that over? Has that been your experience as well in that group?
Oh, I mean, without a doubt. Like, so, when I was 40 and a half, I had a guy come up to me speaking on a stage after, that afterward talk where people come up to you and they want to compliment you or offer you some feedback.
Sure.
I got both from this guy, a little compliment, but a lot of feedback. And the feedback was like, hey, Vinny, you're a pretty dynamic guy. You look relatively young. Don't blow your 40s by giving it to your business over your kids. And I didn't even know this guy. And to be honest with you, I'm on the plane on the way home after I niced him and gave him my fake, good for you. Thanks, buddy. Really appreciate that encouragement. I got on the plane and I started really journaling about how much of a jerk he was and how mad I was at him. And over the coming months, it actually profoundly changed my life. I went home. It's what we call 360 leadership now, but I changed everything. I actually prioritized and started thinking in a more holistic sense about my life. Instead of success first as a poor kid, work on relationships second, I reordered it. Took me a minute, but here I am, almost 13, 14 years later. And it is so different in these last couple seasons of my life. My kids still have this successful dad who's known quite well, but they see him as Papa V and his friends and all this is like the titles that I have. And so what I noticed, even in my sale of Fully Accountable, to answer your question, was, those search fund people. I don't miss those emails, by the way. I get 3 or 4 of those a day. Hey, I'm an in-residence entrepreneur. I'm looking, yours is a great business. Now,
it's almost like one person writes all of them because we're all almost identical.
The same one. And I feel like there's a guy teaching it. Here's the email to write. The open rate. And so I was confident there's a guy teaching there. I don't want to throw too many stones because I've been guilty of that. But Ditto. I took those calls and answer that. This is the first company of the exits I've had that I've sold internally. I had an outside company ready to buy. Let's call it Thursday. Tuesday, we were supposed to fund. So back in time, I literally canceled that transaction. Something wasn't in my heart settling about it. Well, the dust settles after my vacation, which is when I had canceled that, and came back. And my 2 operating partners presented basically the same business deal back to me and they bought me out.
It was MBO? That's awesome. MBO? Management buyout. Yeah, that's...
yeah. Cool. You use fancier terms. The lawyers should know those. But first time I had done one of those and basically the same terms. Some things we added in there for our own tax advantages. But interestingly, a management team buying you can be harder in one respect and great in another. And so I made some concessions because that word legacy, when I was in my early 40s, meant how much money was I going to leave my kids. Right. That word legacy now meant, okay, have I done well being a good steward of what I've been given? Have I been entrusted with much and done well with it? And as part of that, have I led well? And what am I passing on that's going to live beyond me is the whole idea of Beyond Your Shadow. And that transaction was really through that lens, really for the first time in my life.
I love that, man. I will often be the first person when I speak with a potential client who even brings up the concept of, look, there's more than one kind of exit. Like not all exits are to third-party PE or strategics. And in fact, in some cases, depending on the unique nature of you, your personality, what you've built, your business, how it's run, who you have in the business, you may actually get more satisfaction and accomplish more goals with doing either a management buyout to folks who still want to stay and they're younger and they want to keep kind of slaying the dragon, or even the employees in general in an ESOP. And there's some incredible tax benefits that you get that you really don't get from the others. So I love that. And the concept of exit to me is a little different than it is probably most folks who are only traditional M&A people and don't focus on scale and value acceleration and exit. In terms of, to me, an exit can mean anything. It can mean, you sell it. That's what most people think of. It can mean you transition it to people who were there. It can also mean you're where you were and where I've been at different times in my life. And I have terrible balance and I'm not really showing up in the way with my family or friends that I want to. And I call that key man's prison. I built myself a key man's prison.
That's good. It's good. That's good language.
I've got all these walls around me and I built this key man's prison. Nobody did it but me. But because of it, the business is so dependent upon me that I feel trapped. Well, sometimes just solving that and stepping back a little bit, reevaluating how things are going, bringing some really competent people in, changing the way the company is structured functionally becomes an exit, because they don't necessarily need to transition ownership, but they've gotten back the freedom that they didn't have before, and sometimes reinvigorates the passion and excitement that was gone because they don't feel like a prisoner.
Yeah, I think you got to like evaluate your underlying motivation. So my first exit, I had already tasted enough success where we didn't really have debt or worry about bills, but I had never really accumulated enough in my personal accounts to feel like, I don't know, we're good. And so I have this common understanding that depending on where you are in your story arc of your sale, some people might be trying to satisfy that first clip of like whatever that first version of success looks like.
Yeah.
Even if you're older, if you haven't had that may be what's dominating you. Well, if some of that's mixed in there, or you can see clearly what's really motivating you, typically a sale is based on a couple other conditions, not your basic needs. It's usually triggered by some other events. And that's why your baby boomer generation, someone who's probably experienced other versions of experience and wisdom, they tend to have a good corral on the missing money part, even if they've never really tasted it. But that's tricky, right? It's very tricky because when someone flashes that deposit in front of your bank account, unless you've been there or been counseled by someone like you, like you're probably going to bite.
100%. One of the first things that I always do with any client, and it doesn't matter what size their exit's going to be, but it's especially poignant when you have what could be a really substantial, anywhere from probably starting at about a $10 million check at the end of the deal, all the way up through. Obviously, it gets more significant when you're dealing with.
By the way, you're being such great in your brag. I actually think the number is much lower than that. I think if someone's never put $1 million or $2 million in their bank account, they're consumed with getting that first number.
Yeah.
I actually think you're being super sweet to us 8-figure people. I think most of everyone listening, if I told them right now that I put $2 million in their bank account, they already have that 1.5 million checkout strategy in their mind.
Yeah.
I think there's a group of people that if they get that number, they would run their business way differently.
I agree. And the conversation with anybody really looks like this. It's, I want X amount of money. Okay, great. Awesome. What are you going to do with it? Well, and some vague answer. No. Like the day after closing, that money clears and hits. What specifically are you going to do? What does the next week, month, 6 months look like for you? And what I'm looking for is how well they've thought through what's coming next. Not so much the implications of the different financial tools that we have available and tax savings. Really, that's tangential. But what I'm really looking for is this person able to step into the identity of who they've been for this entire time and how much they've been paying themselves? Because let's say in that $2 million example, chances are if you're going to sell a business and you're going to get $2 million, you probably have been paying yourself 150 or less, unless it's a really high margin business. You've probably been paying yourself 150 grand or so. There's a significant difference in being used to living on $150,000 to all of a sudden having access to $2 million. That's an identity shifter. And the same is true the higher up the ladder you go.
That's right.
So it's like, okay, what are you going to do with it? And what I'm trying to dig around in is this person prepared for the identity shift that's about to happen? Do they have a purpose that will replace the thing that they've been doing? Because if not, then we get into this human condition issue of, well, we have a void. And if I've never had significant financial resource before, the only thing I know to do to fill this void that I'm feeling that I can't describe is to throw money at it and do stuff and buy stuff and do things. And it never works, ever. And so that's the thing that I really try to the best of my ability, working with clients to just prepare them for that. Listen, you may end up with what I call entrepreneurial depression if we're not intentional and sort of prepared.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that 16%. Most people who have a business they've built well, the 16%, are an expert in something.
Yeah.
Very rare are you a generalist like me. You're an expert at something. Even though I'm an expert at building a business, it's very much a generalist conversation. I could take that into almost any business model, but almost everybody sells expertise. And so when they sell their business, they're usually selling themselves as an expert in something they do. And so when they wake up the next day, money in the bank, they actually want to do the same thing.
Yeah. But they have a non-compete.
That's the seasonal depression.
Yeah.
They're like, wait a minute, I've spent 20 years to be an expert and now I'm not allowed to be an accountant, or you fill in the blank. That's a really hard realization for most people. I've noticed in my observation of people getting a deposit in their bank account, that their basic needs, that their validation that they had it took to be a successful business person. That box was checked for him. But more interestingly, isn't what they're going to do with the money. It's this conversation we're having now. It's what are you going to do with yourself?
Yes.
And so that rudderless ship, that purposeless next step is because you just took, we say identity like it's like this thing. I have at least 5 identities. I too am a Christ follower. And so I believe in Jesus. And so I hope to believe at any given day, he's at the top or somewhere in these ranking 5 identities of me, but I'm a dad.
Yep.
I'm a successful author. I'm a businessman. I'm a best friend. I'm a husband. I'm all these things. Those are my identities. And, the successful business guy one is a trophy. And when you sell it off and all of a sudden you don't have that, I'll tell you, the first 1 or 2 for me, I was being real. I was in a desert of a time trying to find my way back to some version of success because I was missing what I thought was my significance.
Yeah. So hierarchically, is it possible that if you took those identities you just described, and the businessman, that's the trophy, that one was really at the top in your heart?
That's right. I had to really, that dying to self we started earlier,
Yeah.
I had to really address that John 3:30 you referred to about laying down myself and he has to become greater. And I think that's so awesome. I was just talking to my son at breakfast about that this morning. And I think that's really hard in the success matrix of our story arc. We have to be honest about it and then look to what are these things, these gods, these other things we place in our life that are greater than the purpose or faith that we were given.
100%, man. That has been my experience, and it's a lot of what I talk about. And I don't always lead with this depending on who I'm talking to, but really all I'm doing is I'm trying to walk people through the concept or the parable of the talents from an ideological identity standpoint, which is stewardship, really. And that's the part,
That's right.
the words that I'll use. I mean, listen, what if instead of being the owner of this, which is a permanent condition and a permanent identity, what if you're a steward and your only job is for the amount of time that you're involved with it, whatever it is, to do the very best you can to steward it well, to help it multiply and to help it improve over time. And then when the time comes for you to no longer be associated with whatever it is, you can leave with your head held high and a full heart, knowing that you did that. You did the best that you could to steward this thing forward. And for me, it always goes back to, I sometimes have to sort of sneak those biblical truths in depending on who I'm working with, but it's no more complicated than that.
Yeah, I'm probably a little bit more less. I live out my faith with Christ, and then that's my faith. So I'm not really trying to, so to speak, convince you of what I believe.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if I model it in such a way, you might be interested in looking under the hood, and always happy to do that with you or anyone listening if they want to. But that's my faith, and so in that, I can't help but live out the story of what goes on with me on that. And so, if I don't ever intend to be offensive. It's the reality of the life that I'm living. And one of them is this, what reason I wrote this recent book, Beyond Your Shadow, Legacy Through Multiplication, is there's another lie that's tied to selling a business. It's that same lie that's tied to retirement, that if I check all these boxes and I get this stuff, well, then that's it. I've run the race. Well, then what happens to the next run?
Right.
That's why when I put that first amount of money in my bank account, income is like the other 4 things that aren't satisfied: the barren womb, the scorched land. It needs more. And so the first reaction to income is needing more of it. And so I realized that there's other things that lead to investing in people. And so that's the tricky part of this thing. Why I can't believe that after 20 years of expertise or 30 years of expertise, that the golf course and the hot tub is supposed to get all my expertise. Now, listen, I won back my time. I'm so blessed. I don't have to be on this show if I don't want to be. I didn't have to write that book. My calendar is mine. I don't really owe anybody other than him. And as a result of that, I have freedom. What am I going to do with that freedom? And where I find disillusionment post-sale is the same disillusionment that I see in post-retirement. You're rudderless.
Yeah.
You don't have something. My best friend, Jeff, says, you better have a reason for the alarm clock to get you out of bed.
Otherwise, you just won't set it. Yep. Yeah, that's so true. I don't know if you have experienced this, but I have this concept when it comes to this human condition ascension that we go through as business owners, and money particularly, which is, I call it, because I was a psych major back when dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Of course you were. I can tell already. I could have guessed you were.
Yeah, that was my undergraduate degree. And it's so funny because people will have a joking conversation. They'll find that out and they're like, "Oh, wow, do you ever regret that as a major because you went into business and you don't use it?" I was sort of chuckle a little bit, like I have no idea. Like I can learn finance from YouTube. Like these things were more valuable, but I call it climbing Maslow's hierarchy of despair, which is a weird way to position that, but I went back and audited my life and the decisions that I made and the byproduct of those decisions, from growing up very, very poor with a single mom in a mill town in Maine to all the way through to the life that I sometimes can't believe myself that I have today.
Yeah.
And there were these signposts along the way, and the Maslow's ladder of despair comes in thusly. When I was in college and I first went to college, if there was somehow, some way where I got an extra $10 or $20, that $20 allowed me to buy, some pizza, a few things, whatever it was. There was a very tangible increase immediately in my quality of life.
Yeah.
Well, then I get a part-time job in college, working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And, it was $200-$300 a week. Well, again, that allows me to get an apartment with 5 other guys, but still an apartment, better than a dorm room. I can put a little bit of food in the fridge, and I can take my now wife, then girlfriend, out, not to a nice restaurant, but I can take her out. So again, significant tangible increase based upon an increase in money to my actual quality of life. And then I graduate college and I get my first time job with Enterprise Rent-A-Car. And it's $37,500 a year, but it's a 47.5-hour work week, and you're washing cars in a suit. A lot of great lessons there. But again, now I can get
and able to take her out to Bennigan's. So you upgraded.
I go to Bennigan's. Like I get a 5-year-old Chrysler Concorde on a lease that was absurd. Not a lease, a purchase that was absurd. But nonetheless, now I have a car that's not breaking down every 5 minutes. We have an apartment together. So you do this enough, and it's true, because you're dealing with, initially, your basic needs are not met as a human being when you're starting from a lack and a deficit, and you grow and grow. And every time you check off one of those boxes, there's an improvement that's tangible. And so this, which is good. None of that is bad.
No, not bad at all.
But there becomes a point where there is an issue. And I remember I was 25 years old, and I had somehow found myself in the mortgage business, and I found myself running a mortgage company. And then I'm making $100,000, maybe a little bit more than that at 25. And growing up, for some reason, that was a number in my head. I don't know why, but I didn't know anybody, at least to my knowledge, that made anywhere near that.
Yeah, 6 figures was a big deal. I mean, we take that for granted now, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm with you, man.
You were loaded. So I hit it at 25, and the most interesting thing happened. I thought all the way growing up, if I could just get to somehow, some way making 6 figures, I'd feel rich. Life would be perfect. There would be no problems. And the darndest thing happened. I hit it, and I don't know that I've ever been more miserable and unhappy in my life. And so I'm like, well, this is weird. So I'm like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. Oh wait, I know what the problem is. I'm not buying the right toys. That's why I don't feel like I'm right with this. So I went out and I bought, a BMW in the ugliest like rap video watch you've ever seen. And, and so I'm buying these things, and I'm no longer.
Said yes to you.
She did. Yeah. Luckily that was the saving grace of all of this. And this is actually before we became Christian. But
Debbie and I were 28 and 27.
Same. Wow. Same age. So do all that, but I'm not getting that same dopamine bump, and I'm not getting that same very tangible increase in the quality of my life when I buy this stuff. And so I'm lost, because I can't figure out, Vinny, why every time I made more money incrementally over this past, at that time, 6-7 years, I was happier. And now that is no longer true. And what I figured out, and it was 10 years later, looking back, that I figured it out, was once all those basic needs were met, the moment all those basic, I had shelter, I had food, I had a great relationship, I had love in my life, additional money really didn't make a meaningful impact in my life at all. And that's the thing that I saw a video the other day, and we can quibble about the amount, but I saw a video the other day where a gentleman said he believes $250,000 is the number at which, if you make that amount anything you make over and above that really will never change your quality of life ever again. Unless you're doing really crazy things like
And his assumption is you're going to continue to make that.
100%. That's his assumption.
Yeah. Right. So let's assume that, by the way, he's probably right. Well, he's got to be somewhere close to right because, on a salary basis in most states in America, to be a top 1%er, you have to do 450,000 of annualized salary. To be a top 3%er, you just got to be above $175,000. So at least for 97% of the community and most people, 90% of our listeners, the reality is that's got to be a true answer, right? Whatever you've trapped your lifestyle into, I agree with him. It's probably true, assuming it sticks around. Everyone's afraid of losing it. And I think that's fair in some respects, but I think his thing probably plays out true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And
if you and I were both poor, I was working towards being excited about 60 or 70.
Heck yeah. I was pumped. That first job I told you about that I got, I was so excited just to get a job when I left college, because you go to college, and I went into debt to do it. Because back then it was go to college. And I was the first person generationally in my family that went to college, and I got kicked out for getting a 0.0 in the middle of it because
you and I have a very similar story arc, man.
I thought getting in was the goal. So I didn't know and I didn't know how to study. I was an athlete, didn't know any of this. So I got kicked out, figured out I was a pretty good salesperson because I talked my way back in. And I also figured out that, so when I got back in, you're going to love this one. When I got back in, the dean had said in letting me back in, you know what? I'll give you another semester, because the only way to bring your cumulative GPA up high enough to not boot you at the end of the year anyway, you'd have to get a 4.0. And we both know you can't do that. And the darndest thing, him saying that ticked me off so much. And it just rooted into the core. I'm like, this son of a gun. What did he just say? I ended up taking a full load plus 2 evening courses. And for some reason back then, and one of them I remember was business law. And if you took evening courses, you could get additional credit. So I ended up with a 4.1 that semester. And the reason that's funny, my wife still talks about it, because to this day, she goes, that was the moment where I was the most furious with you in our life. I'm like, why? She goes, because I realized you had the ability to do it at will and you just didn't. And then the other thing, so I walk into this dean's office. I'll never forget him.
I'm not going to let Debbie watch this episode.
So Dr. Edwards, I walk in, I'll never forget his name. And I very dramatically take my transcript and I put it on his desk and I say, you told me that you didn't think I could get a 4.0. Don't ever bet against me. It was very dramatic and immature in retrospect. He looks up, he's probably 60 at this time. He looks up over his glasses with this smirk on his face and he goes, bet against you. I was just trying to see if I could get you lit up a little bit. And he knew exactly he did it on purpose. Yeah. He intentionally did it because, and I asked him years later, like, how did you see in me? There's a part of me that I'm not always proud of, but there's a part of me, chip on my shoulder, that if you tell me something can't be done, I'm going to go out there and do it better than anybody's ever done it. And I
want to push back against that. If you wipe away some of our human thinking on that, with all this, you have this drive that most people just don't have. And so I think a little bit of the watering down there is the drive part. And this kind man that I believe the Lord used to wake you up
100%
was pointing out a vision about your drive. Your pride just got in the way because he called you out.
Yeah.
That's all that was. And so you already knew you had this gear, right? We judge ourselves on our emotions. We judge everyone else by their actions. Yes. So you knew you had it. And then you just needed to go prove it to him as this chip on your shoulder, poor kid. Your wife's clear disappointment is because you have a gift that most don't have and you were just wasting it.
100%. She, to this day, and she uses it on our children because our children exhibit in a different way. So, and I also didn't know back then, I didn't know that I had ADHD. Probably anybody who knew what it was and had been around me for more than 3 minutes could have told you that I did, but I didn't know it. Well, 2 of our 3 children do. And so they exhibit some of the same traits, but we're more on top of them than I ever had anybody be. And so she'll use it with the kids and just, she'll be like, your dad, his first 2 years in college never bought a book. And he just kind of had this C average, except for that one semester where he totally flaked off. And she tells the story about it. And my son, especially the 13-year-old, who still is just young enough to think that his dad is just the best. I'm waiting for that to change. But he,
By the way,
they
it
were-
comes back, even if it changes for a moment. I have 2 sons that are 20 and 22 who adore me.
oh
They
man,
look
that's
up to
encouraging.
me. They honor me. We fight,
Yeah.
but I hear so many kind and affirming words from them. So I don't really buy into this idea that the teenagers completely melt down. I do think it's a very hard season,
Yeah.
but I think your son, you keep leaning into the Lord, he's going to adore you and respect you.
Oh, that's very encouraging, man. Thank you for that. Because that's the thing you always hear is you might lose them for a little bit, but they'll come back. But
That's right.
He'll ask her, he'll say, well, Mom, why would you be upset with Dad for, getting a 4.0 and doing that? She goes, because he literally flipped a switch. And the only time I ever saw him study for anything back then, it was straight A's. And so he had the ability to do that whenever he wanted. He just chose not to use it. And she'll get into, bringing it right back to the talents. I was not stewarding my own talent well. And so that was a lesson in a lot of ways. And it was looking back, it was an interesting moment in our marriage that, as we grew together and then became Christians a few years later together and have grown in that way, we both can sort of point back to
What's your wife's name?
Crystal.
Yeah, Crystal's like Debbie. Debbie saw it, saw me wasting it, saw me get back into school, get qualified, grade out the whole way just to get into a respectable law school. What has then been a point of disappointment around me wasting those talents is now something she banks on in our relationship because she knows her husband will use those exact same skills in the fidelity of their marriage and for their children. And so Crystal adores that about you. The reason she teases it is to remind you not to ever put yourself back in that situation.
And there have been times where she's had to. So I'll tell you, when I had to study for, and it had been years since I studied for anything formal. I'm always learning, probably a lot like yourself. I'm a very curious person. I'm always reading books, listening to podcasts, having great conversations with people who just know something about a thing that I don't know. I naturally like that.
Yeah.
I hadn't done anything formal in a long time. I decided to get a CEPA designation, Certified Exit Planner. And it is a formal process. It's not long, but it's...
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. What's it called?
CEPA, Certified Exit Planning. It's really great. I can't recommend it highly enough. And so in doing it, it's about it's a 1 week.
Is that what you do, by the way?
Yeah. Yeah. So
cool. Yeah. So we don't know much about each other privately or in that way, but that's cool. So I'll look that up. I didn't know that was a thing. I probably won just by the nature of what I do, but I didn't know that was a thing. So
yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Go
ahead.
I get that certification. And in doing so, it's a lot of just rigorous study because it's a lot of rote memory and concepts that I'm not familiar with in this depth. To the depth that they're going into it, so you're covering everything. And the whole reason I did it is because I got tired of people coming to me when they wanted to exit, they had already made the decision. And I'm looking at their business and I'm looking at what realistically it's going to transfer for. And I'm going, you're leaving so much money on the table. If you had just come to me 2 or 3 years before, we could have addressed these things. And I could have.
And then your success rate of talking someone into 2-3 more years is pretty low, right?
Yeah, it is. And so
they're done.
They've already made the decision. Yeah. They're checked out. Whereas I'm like, I need
because the punchline, everyone listening and why JB is awesome is listen to him about the 18 months at least.
Yes.
If you come to him and you're ready, are you willing to be talked out of? Can you give it 18 months more at least?
Yeah.
Which is really more 2 to 3 years, by the way, double everything we promise you.
Yeah.
If you can give it that, you'll get the dollars you want. If you can't, then let us help you get a discount.
100%. Yeah. 100%. That's exactly what we're doing. So in doing this CEPA, it's so much formal rote studying, and I hadn't done it in a decade. And I'm looking down the barrel of it, and I had this brief moment. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and I'm looking, and I'm going, honey, I think I might have made a mistake here. I'm not sure. She goes, this sounds like a college semester type of issue. She goes, you'll be fine. That's all she said. She said, you'll be fine. And the darndest thing was once I started getting into it, and now I would say I also study very differently than most people. I'm not the kind of person who can sit down, take notes, and do that over a 4-month period. That's just not how I'm built. The way that I'm wired is I need to absolutely destroy my brain for like 48 hours straight, nonstop with information and go these crazy.
Hope some of it sticks around before the test, right?
That's it. And also, I'll talk into a voice note because me having to say it and then listening back to it.
That's
like,
good.
Do I understand this or not? So did it. But it was sort of an interesting, fun thing to harken back and be like, okay, I haven't felt that angst and intimidation about having to learn something new in a long time. And so I go to take the test, and I'm convinced, Vinny, that I'm going to fail this test. No way I'm going to get this thing. And so I take it. And this is one of the few tests that I've ever taken that I look at. I said, one of two things happened. Either I just horrifically bombed this test or I aced it. And I don't think there's anything in between. It was just one of these funky ones. And 3 days later, I got a thing that said you passed. They don't even tell you what your grade was, which drove me insane, by the way. Something about, I really wanted to know what the score was.
They don't tell you your results.
They don't tell you your results. You just pass, fail. Yeah, pass, fail. You're either a CPA or you're not. And so, got it. But it was also a fun thing because my kids, for the first time in their lives, got to see dad actually studying for something. So that was kind of a fun thing.
That's a great story, man. And I'll tell you, it's funny. I don't know what that certification is, not because I want it, but because we need more of you.
Yeah. It's, either you're committed, and I would say this about any profession. So the people who are CPAs, and this will be interesting to you. There was about 120 people in the cohort that I was in. 80% of them, maybe more, were either a financial advisor of some type, an accountant, or an attorney. That was about 80%.
And they wanted the credentials?
They wanted the credentials because they'll often work on exit plans and they'll take their piece of it. And they were seeing so much of the CPA methodology, which is fantastic, that they wanted to understand, okay, what is this person who brought me in to work with a client and do my part? What are they talking about? What is this 360-degree thing? Because it doesn't just cover, it talks about gaps a lot. So it doesn't just cover the value gap, like what you'd like to sell the business for and what you need to get for it and what it's worth today. That's the value gap. Then there's the profit gap. Where's your profit compared to a best-in-class company? The thing that's fascinating that resonated as soon as I saw their curriculum was they also look at the human being.
Talent gap.
What's your personal gap, both financial in terms of what you need your net worth to be when you decide to be done, if you're done, and where you are today. And let's go ahead and make sure that we're addressing that. Tax planning, legacy, estate planning. And also, they don't do this, but I do. I add, from a human being perspective, you've had purpose in what you're doing. Whether you loved it or grew to not, nonetheless, you've had purpose for however long you've been doing that. You're still going to need purpose when you're done. What's that going to be? Because to your great point, I know exactly in my household what would happen if I just stopped doing anything. I would go into my house and I would suddenly have all sorts of ideas about better ways that things could be done in our household. My wife would tolerate that for about 2 days. And then she'd say, you need to go find something to do. The next thing I would do is I'd go try to play more golf. I'm not a good golfer. I just tell the jokes and get a beer for everybody. That's all I really do at the golf course because I'm not good enough at it. I'd be tired of that. You can only catch so many fish, and I'd be out there looking for a problem
the next
to solve.
Opportunity.
Yeah, a problem to solve so that the gear that I was born with, that I know not everybody has, that I'm not always happy that I have, but I need to get into. It's like fifth gear.
I speak against that, by the way. I want to stop you. It is you can't speak against your gifts, man. Don't do that again. Those are your gifts.
That's a great point.
Those are your gifts. And there's so many people listening who wish they had some of that. And so the reality is what it is. Now, we don't always use him for his benefit or glory.
No.
I'll give you that. If that's what you're speaking to, I'll own that too. But so why do I do the things I know I shouldn't do, but I don't do the things I know I should do? I'm with you.
Yeah.
But those gifts, man, my daughter can sing like a champ. When I hear her sing, I think, my goodness, I could never, ever, ever even consider doing that. But if I ever hear her talk against her gift, I'll do what I did with you. I'll interrupt you mid-sentence and be like, whoa, hold on. And so I have a massive gift in business. And I have learned to, early on, I kind of was very arrogant in the way I would, so to speak, passive aggressively talk down to people. And what I just do is meet them where they are and not talk ill of my own gifting.
That's a great point, man. I love that. I also love what you said a little bit ago, which is this sort of idea that the gifts that you're given are the gifts that you're given, and you can use them positively to impact the world and move forward, or you can obviously you can use them for maybe things that are not as healthy for you. That's been true for me, and that same drive. You mentioned earlier that it doesn't just apply to business; it applies to you as a husband and as a father. And where that shows up for me, and I'm going to guess for you, is if things are moving along and they're fine, and all of a sudden something happens, whatever that is, and there's an issue in my marriage where it's just not right, it's not as strong as it needs to be, or my children are going through a really difficult time with something, I will burn everything to the ground to make sure that it gets addressed.
Yeah.
It's just, and so that's how that same drive that normally I use in business. Absolutely. Same with a friend. If I have a friend that's just, life's not going well, I'll do the same thing. Like, okay, it's like shifting like the focus of a laser beam. Like, okay, this laser is going right here, right now. We're going to fix this together until, and I'm in it with you.
You might not be able to stay focused, but you can laser focus.
Yes.
Those are not the same things.
Great point. Yeah. Yeah. It's true. My wife does not have ADHD. And there are times when my children they'll do something and she'll just be looking at them like, why would you, what are you doing? And I'm trying to translate, to her through, the ADHD brain. And I'm like, it's really, it's what you just said. I think there's a misconception and I'm sure there's a spectrum here. I'm sure,
Yep.
but I think there's a misconception that ADHD people can't focus on anything. That hasn't been true for me. Actually, it's the opposite.
But it's actually not even true clinically.
Yeah. It's actually that we have an ability to hyper focus on certain things to the exclusion of a lot of other things.
Yeah. And there's an argument that you're just overstimulated.
Yeah.
And so, I've been reading a book recently. I line up with her on a lot of her stuff, and she's got I forget her author name, but it's a book's called Good Energy. And she talks a lot about ADHD and this whole idea of hyper focus versus laser focus versus continued focus, and where we have some imbalance in our ATP about it. And I would argue a lot of the environmental conditions and even some of the things that you and I are struggling with, you're struggling with your sons. The education system's not necessarily designed to support through some of those things. My best friend that I referred to earlier, their son, wonderful young man. If you had seen him in his teens, you thought for sure the school system was going to kick him out. And now, definitely ADHD. But just getting him up, moving him a little bit, then putting him down, like addressing stimulation allowed him to have moments of focus as opposed to this idea that we have constant focus.
Maybe my greatest struggle right now as a father, battle, that's the word I'm going to use, is making sure that, and we have a great public school system. I'm not complaining about that. We were very fortunate to live where we do. Wonderful public school system. However, if your children are not neurotypical straight down the middle, they don't always know what to do. There's 800 kids in the elementary school alone, 4,000 in the high school.
They're resource deficient to address anything that are fringes to the mainstream.
So my greatest battle is to do whatever I need to do to make sure that my two children that have, it's true of all of them, but my two that have ADHD don't ever begin to believe the lie that they're in any way broken whatsoever, based upon trying to fit into the very rigid culture of what the school expects. And I am relentless with that.
Yeah, it's a shame because it's a diagnosis, but I don't know where I'm sure I could go back to where it happened, but we gave it a negative connotation along the way, as opposed to just like, I wear glasses because I have a vision problem. And so are we going to make fun of me because I can't see as well as you can, or I have to adjust for it?
Fairness.
Oh, there you go. Look at you, fancy man. And so whatever those things are, like we have so many of them, right? Like we'll give me a pass on my bad or my ability to absorb calcium.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's a shame that in the neurodivergent community, we're actually fighting back against somehow a disease.
100%. One of the greatest mentors I've ever had is a dear friend to this day. Brilliant man when it comes to sales and offers. One of the OGs. He's on the autism spectrum. And the darndest thing is, I strongly believe he would not be the brilliant person that he is and able to achieve the level of insight he has on certain things if he wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, so now, is it interesting to me? And that one business I bragged about that's on my website, Creative Learning Workshop, we created day service programming for mental challenged people. If you were low functioning on the spectrum, then you worked in workshops that we created. Great business, still going today. Check them out. Give them some money. They need our help. Wonderful company. What was interesting to me in that process, and Debbie really softened my heart to this, anyone on the spectrum, wherever you are, if you're talented, like everyone has at least a talent, but if you're like standing out and have a talent, typically what I found with anyone with neurodivergence in any capacity is that you just have an overabundance usually in one of them.
Yeah.
And, someone who's a little bit more of a generalist like me, maybe I got great EQ, but I can't laser in like this young man, Isaac, we knew. He was a great writer. But the second somebody drops something, he loses mind because there was like this loud noise. So he needed to be in environments that were safe to sound so that he could excel in what he did. And so, but people would dog him for being, and the words we all used to use, for being things that like, is it tricky? If you track any of our mavericks in our society, their skill sets tipped in one direction and they miss usually some well balancing.
We've got a very prominent one right now that you can look at clear as day, and Elon Musk, and you can see, you can see that the singular brilliance that he has in certain subjects is
Off the charts.
Off the charts, and it creates a deficit in other areas. And he says it, it's very clear. It's very rare to see someone who's truly exceptional, and we get to see. I think we get to see this distilled, Vinnie, in business. I don't know why that is, but we do. We get to see folks who are truly brilliant at what you were saying earlier, the thing, usually at least one thing that they're great at. And you get to look at that and you see true unfiltered brilliance that has been realized.
Yeah.
Very rarely do you see that. And you look at the life and you see a 360 degree, really holistically healthy person. It's very rare. It hasn't.
Yeah. First off, we weren't meant to be worshiped, as you know, right?
Yeah.
So we fizzle out even in our own little environments, but like, I've never really worked well at a habit of exercise. But if you look at my sons or even my children, you'd be like, oh, they must have got that from their dad. I played Division I soccer. I was this guy. No, they got that from like the discipline of that. Yeah. But when it comes to the discipline of business and writing and the things I do, I'm in a pretty elite class. Yeah. And it's funny. I don't know why certain things, I just think it is what it is.
Yeah. It is what it is. It's who we were meant to be. That's what I always tell. Look, you were made to be exactly who you were, and your job is to maximize whatever that is.
Can I say it a little more wholesomely? Can I be a little kinder? Yeah. Can I practice more humility? Absolutely. Yeah. But that doesn't change some of those other things.
Now, and everybody who knows me knows that I love the Lord. I cuss more than I should. I like bourbon. I'm a little rough around the edges. But here's the darndest thing. That allows me to build beautiful relationships with people that not everybody can. And to go into rooms and not everybody can, because I'm never going into a room from a place of judgment, because chances are any mistake that I'm going to see somebody made, I've already made it 3 or 4 times in my life. So,
or you could just watch mine publicly to make sure, at least I didn't make Vinnie's mistakes.
Well, my friend, I would love to end on this, because we buried it a little bit, but you brought up something really profound that happens in anyone's life, but especially the life of an entrepreneur, a husband and a father. And what you don't know is that for about an 8-year window in my career, I was in cardiac care on the device side, and then biologics. So thoracic surgery, cardiac surgery, defibrillation, all of that. Spent a lot of time in that space. So the second that you said you'd had unplanned triple bypass surgery, that's a very significant, thing that happens in the person's life. And then you alluded a little bit to the ways that's changing, but it sounded like that was already beginning before that happened. Were you feeling symptoms that you couldn't describe, and that was the thing, or it's just the time of life that it was? And then what has happened since then in terms of your outlook and perspective? Because that's a perspective changer for sure.
I mean, it is. And before this, in August, at our annual retreat every year, Fully Accountable, we'd always have some big announcements. Well, August 1 of 23, I resigned as our CEO and promoted our COO to the CEO role.
Yeah.
And so we'd already been down this road where I knew I was really starting a journey in another direction.
Yeah.
I spent a year before that, and then the subsequent year, really in like this, maybe 6 months of that, in like this desert, what am I supposed to be doing? I just sold the business on August 1st of 2024. And so, we go through these seasons. And so I believe that had I found out some of the stuff I found out in a very compressed couple-week window, I wonder what decisions I would or wouldn't have made about that transition in my life. Because, like you get these things that happen to you, like in some respects, my 150 people team and all this stuff. Well, it was kind of my church. I was the pastor of it. I had a lot of people to talk to. Well, for the last X amount of weeks, I've been working on me and only me and recovering. And the one thing I can say to you, here's my evangelistic talk for the day. I, at the start of this, just decided that I was going to trust him. And I just kept praying, Lord, wherever I don't, just give me that trust so I can continue to trust in you. And there's a passage in Romans that says, if you don't know what to pray, ask him for what to pray and he'll give it to you. And so I didn't know what to say. All I says, I want that. And a friend of mine said, then you have this thing. I started describing how I felt through this. I've never was afraid, still now, of the idea of dying. It's not like because I know where I'm going, but I do know where I'm going. That wasn't what it was. It was because I would miss my children. I wouldn't want to not be with my life, but I wasn't afraid of it because he had given me this peace that I had honestly can't describe other than just telling you that's what I had. And what's been amazing is people who've been watching my journey are like, Vinnie, it's ridiculous. Like you living out your faith in this, it's inspiring and it's holy cow. Like, and so part of the light bulb kicked on. Like I'm thankful he's been giving me this trust so I could have this perfect peace. Yeah. I'm really thankful for it. And I think part of it is so that I do more of that. And then also as part of loving him is that in loving others, I openly share that.
As part of loving him and as part of loving others, openly share that. That's a beautiful gift, my friend. Well, this has been awesome. I've been so enjoyed spending a little bit of time getting to know you and just chatting back and forth about life and business and this crazy ride that we've been on. We will put all the notes below. We'll put where people can come and find you.
And in those show notes, we'll give a gift out. So it's at beyondyourshadow.com/gift. I'll give access to our newest book, that Sale Ready Matrix we talk about, and some other goodies in there. And we just always like to show up on a show and give stuff away. So.
Well, I love it, man. Thanks. I didn't expect that, but I certainly appreciate it. And I wish you the very best and continued success, both with your health, with your family, and also with a magnification and a megaphone of this real legacy and these beautiful things that you have to share with people, my friend.
Buddy, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.